today we're really excited to have our special guest presenter, Jeff Rowley. Jeff is the claims manager here at the Trust and has been here for a couple of years now, Jeff.
That is correct. 2.5 years.
2.5 years. I was going to say probably almost getting to 3. And Jeff has a long and illustrious career in loss prevention, risk management, claims, and all of that with various different large organizations in the state of Utah. And he is just an absolute wealth of knowledge and just if you ever if you don't even have a claim question, go and ask Jeff about something and he'll be able to tell you about it. So we appreciate Jeff taking the time today to talk to us about sewer backups, water line breaks. Oh my, those challenging subjects that we find on a all too regular basis. Right now, we're really focused on other kind of floods, but these are important subjects, Jeff.
Well, they absolutely are. Let me get ready to share my screen. And actually, what's going on around the state with all the flooding could end up causing the same kinds of sewer backup issues that we get otherwise. So let's get going here. And we appreciate everybody being here with us today. Can you see my screen now?
Oh, I can. It's making me
nauseous
in my mouth a little bit there.
Hey, well, these things happen, unfortunately. And I would guess that if with the sewer operators that are on here today, they're saying that doesn't look exactly like sewer, that looks like sewer plus. And that would be correct. And we'll actually be talking about that scenario a little bit later today. Let me just walk us through our agenda here. We'll talk about prevention, what can be done before you have a sewer backup or a water main break to minimize the risk of that happening, as well as how to minimize the effects of it, what to do during an incident, what's it like, what are your priorities, and some communication do's and don'ts. And then afterwards, what's your response like? How do you engage us? How do you help the public understand what's going on to help minimize their concerns with the situation, because they're going to have some. And I just thought I'd start this presentation with this little reminder that what you do, even though your success means that people can live their lives without thinking about where the water comes from or where it goes, your function is very important. Here's a statement from the World Health Organization. Safe and readily available water is important for public health, whether it is used for drinking, domestic use, food production, or recreational purposes. Improved water supply and sanitation and better management of water resources can boost countries' economic growth and greatly contribute to poverty reduction. And so we have a great society here. People can go to work to make money, live happy, live healthy lives. And a big part of that is what you contribute to that by allowing the water to flow where it's supposed to flow and when. But of course, there are times when things go wrong, and that's what we're here to talk about today. And so over the years, as a risk manager in the public sector, I have collected a bunch of stories. And so as Jason said, you can give me a call, even if it's not a claims question, and I might not have your answer for you, but I'll probably have a story just to at least entertain you if I can't relieve your stress. But let me start with 2 stories that occurred during my career, and then we'll follow up on these stories later in the presentation. But the first one, the H-Rock Rooster Tail. I worked for 15 years for a large city that will remain nameless, but they are, the capital city for the state. And they had a large water line, a 16-inch pressurized water line that came straight out of the Mountain Dale Reservoir. Well, one late fall day, right as that pipe passed underneath what's called the H-Rock, where high school students go up and paint the rock with an H for Highland High School every fall, the pipe burst, and it created this huge rooster tail of water that went down a natural slope, creating these crevasses, several of them, one of them more than 6 feet deep, gathering all of that rock and mud as it went down the hill. It went down a ways, and just before hitting residences, it hit a very large rock. All the water then was diverted into one channel that went straight into a person's home. That home, thankfully, was a steel framed home, and water filled immediately up the front layer, the top layer, which was steel framed because they had a swimming pool on the upper level above their garage. And it filled up the garage with rocks and mud to the point, or not the garage, excuse me, the pool, to the point where you could not tell where the deck ended and the pool began. It was just all one sheet of mud in there. Also, there was a breezeway that went down to the basement. There was a renter in the basement who normally was home during the day. She was a night nurse, but at this time she happened to be outside of her home, which is a good thing because water entered the breezeway, started to fill up very quickly, blew the door to her apartment, filled up her basement with 4 feet of water, and then blew out the front wall of the house before continuing on into the street in front of it. So that was a pretty big loss, and we'll talk more about that. The second one, it all flows down from the University of Utah. This one happened one spring day. It was a wet year, just like this one. And the city had a clay pipe that came out of the University of Utah. For some reason, that pipe failed, collapsed in on itself. And the first home upstream from that collapsed pipe got the brunt of it. Water entered their home through the basement, which had recently, like within the last 2 months before this happened, been completely refinished and refurbished for their children, for their bedrooms, and they had a nice entertainment room down there. But the water came out of the toilet because it had so much head on it from the University of Utah that it came out with such force that it actually peeled the sheetrock off of the ceiling and the wall across the room from the toilet. That's how much pressure there was. The city crews responded and they went to the street in front of the house and opened up all the manholes, trying to find where the blockage was, and spent quite a bit of time looking for where the problem was. All the while, water was filling up into the basement of this home to where it got to the point where it was over 4 feet deep. When I arrived at the home, there was some stuffed animals floating just at the landing up from the basement, and the home just completely reeked. So you've probably had circumstances like this, hopefully none of them as big as this one. And hopefully we never have any as big as these two losses, but these are some that have taught me quite a few lessons, and we'll talk about those as we go on. Well, as what we desire in our public sector is we desire that we have communities that are quiet, where people can work, where the streets are open and viable for using, and people feel comfortable working. And that's the way it is almost all of the time. But then every once in a while, we run into a circumstance where things just go awry, and sometimes they go awry in a big way. And so let's talk a little bit about what legal standards apply to whether or not you, as a public entity in charge of the water system, in charge of the sewer system, are responsible for those untoward incidents that happen. First of all, let's define negligence. And here's a couple of definitions for you out of the Oxford Dictionary. The failure to take proper care. Well, that's a very short sentence, but proper care is not something that's easily defined. Of course, there may be legal standards when there are legal standards for the proper care of a water and sewer system. But in addition to those standards, which are industry health codes and building codes, there are standards which are reasonable for your community. Those are not quite so precise. They're not chapter and verse. And what it comes down to is what's appropriate for your system, or that part of the system governed by your experience and the unique conditions in which you live. For instance, a new system may need less inspections because it's all new and everything flows well, it's been inspected, and so inspections happen less often. Maybe your maintenance can happen less often. However, you'll find even with new systems that there may be hot spots from bellies or other problems because of connections and what people put in the pipes. And so you end up with areas that require more often inspections and maintenance on them. So it really kind of comes down to what's appropriate for your system, and you know that best. And when it comes to a loss and it becomes a lawsuit, it becomes the judges and jury's opportunity to look at your system and say, was that reasonable? Did they take proper care? Well, a perhaps more expansive definition of negligence is the second one there: failure to use reasonable care resulting in damage or injury to others. And so that's what we're going to talk about today, is how to improve the situation and prevent that. Well, here are some examples of maybe some negligence that could be seen. This is from a study that was done in 2018 from the Utah State University, and some of you are probably very familiar with this study, but this chart came from that study. A typical age of failing water mains, 50 years. Expected life of a new water main, 84 years. Well, that may not jive together. If you're putting in your system and you're saying, we don't have to budget to replace that line for 84 years, but your system is typically failing in 50 years, there's a problem with that. Next set there, percentage with a plan to replace water mains, 77%. That's great. Percentage who regularly are replacing those water mains, only 58%. So not only do they not have a plan, but many that have a plan just really aren't doing that. And that certainly will come out in a lawsuit. And then finally, percentage of total water main length replaced annually, 0.8%, and percentage of water mains beyond useful life but lack the funds to replace, well, that's 16%. So that's a scenario where constantly those entities are falling behind in their maintenance, in their capital improvement program, and they can expect that there could be problems that come out of that. There are ways to deal with that and to prepare for that, because we all know that government has limited funds, and we'll talk a little bit about that. So before an incident, how do you prevent your problems? And I stole this information directly from our loss prevention people and the sewer summits that we hold. So none of these are new. Of course, watch your contractors as they're installing the pipes. You don't want to find out 10, 15 years down the road after the warranty period's expired that they bedded those pipes down inappropriately. They've got big rocks all around your pipe, causing them with vibrations and movements to create weak spots in your pipe. Once you find that out, then you know you've got a problem the whole length of that pipe. And so the best thing to do is, of course, watch and make sure your contractors are following best practices and your standards when installing pipes for you. Certainly annual manhole inspections, maps, and keep those maps up to date and have locate equipment with you so that at any time you can go out there and find where your manholes are on your valves. Speaking of the maps, with the University of Utah loss that I talked about earlier with the collapsed clay sewer pipe, was the city liable because the sewer pipe collapsed? No, not necessarily. But they became liable because the crews didn't have the correct maps with them, and they just went and looked at the manholes in front of the home out in the street, not realizing that in truth, the pipe that failed was behind. And so it took them a long time to find that out and figure it out and redirect that sewage. They became liable at that point. We ended up putting that family, the father of that family happened to be an assistant attorney general, so he wasn't messing around. We put them up for a month in the Little America Hotel. And unfortunately, while they were digging up that pipe so that they could replace it, because it was such a wet spring, as the dump truck that was taking the soil they were pulling out of the ground got to a certain weight, the ground gave away under that dump truck and it slid backwards down into the hole. It didn't slide backwards directly, it actually curved to the side and took out these poor people's garage as it went down in the hole as well. So it was a really bad day for the city and for that poor family there. Going on, so make a plan. Of course, build a system-specific SSMP and update that as you need it. Have a backup and break response plan, have equipment ready, have employees trained so that, and a communication system such that people can respond immediately to those things. And then maintain your system on an appropriate schedule. we recommend 3 years, and make sure that includes TVing and other methods for identifying problem spots, and then manage and mitigate those hot spots. Learn from experience and create standards for specific locations based upon what your experience there happens to be. So, pro tip for you, periodically put out a notice online or through your community newsletter informing homeowners of the risk of flooding, of sewer backups, of water main breaks. Let them know that they can try and get insurance for that it's not generally covered on your policy unless you add it on there. And some insurance carriers don't provide any coverage for sewer backup or for water coming in through the windows or doors from outside of their homes. But you can find it. You just have to ask for it in addition to that, and give them some tips on how they can prepare for that to happen, letting them know in advance that, hey, these things happen, and not necessarily are you as the public entity that runs these systems responsible in every situation. Also a great time to remind them about what not to put down into the sewer systems that do create these backup problems. And then look at your ordinances. Make sure that your ordinances and your practices are in alignment. For instance, there are some ordinances out there that say the city is responsible to maintain the sewer or the water line right to the valve, and then everything beyond that is the homeowners, or the sewer to the connection with the main from the lateral. Others say that it's right to the property line, and if you are maintaining to the valve or to the main, but your ordinance says something different and something happens in there, you might be stuck in a lurch. So take a look at what your ordinances say, and do they match with your practices? And if they aren't what you want to be the case for your organization, take the opportunity to update your ordinances. Let's talk about discretionary function immunity. We had a webinar on this a couple of years ago. Heather White from the law firm of Snow, Christensen, and Martineau came and talked to us about this. Discretionary function immunity provides a lot of protection for your organization in advance of a loss, and not just because it prevents liability, but it also helps to lay out and define a great way to manage your system. Discretionary function immunity comes from a well-documented conversation between the folks that run the systems and your elected officials about what your concerns are, what the lifespan of your equipment and your assets are, how frequently you need to replace them, and what that's going to cost. For instance, a water district, they will study their existing system, they'll identify age, history, soil conditions, future growth, and other relevant factors in order to recommend a replacement or capital improvement program to their board. The board then deliberates. They might ask for more questions. They might ask for outside professional or consultants to consider their capital improvement program. Ultimately, through that discussion, they make a decision. And of course, because we're public entities, that decision probably will come back that you don't get as much money as you asked for right away. But it should come back with a reasonable amount of money, considering your needs now and the needs in the future. And through that process, the government and the laws of the state of Utah recognize that you can't do everything all at once. You can't be on top of all of the maintenance requirements that are across the system for all public entities. And so you fund it appropriately based upon good information and decisions made by your policy makers, not managers, but the policy makers. This creates discretionary function immunity and provides a great deal of protection for you. As well as you can see, it creates a good system for making sure that everybody's on board and understands what the real needs and interests are, and decisions are made. And then when bad things happen, they can't say, well, why didn't you inform us? Why aren't we keeping up with these things? Well, we did. And here's what we did to make sure that we're on task and we're doing what you asked us to do. So it provides a great amount of CYA, not just between operations and the elected officials, but also between your entity and the public. Okay, well, eventually, around the state, things happen. Let's watch this short news clip about something that happened in Salt Lake City.
Stanley, we're going to send it over to John Franke in the newsroom right now with a closer look at that breaking news we're following in Salt Lake City. John?
Yeah, hey, Carrie, a water main break at 1300 South and 7th West, creating some big problems this morning. Here's some video that was shot just moments ago. Salt Lake City's Department of Public Utilities now says that 6 homes are damaged by this water. A car also swallowed in a sinkhole. Luckily, no injuries have been reported, but the Public Utilities Department says that they have a crew on the scene out there to repair what they're calling a 16-inch line that broke, and the water there is starting to drain. As Danny mentioned, 13th South is closed in that area, so just avoid this part of Salt Lake City this morning if you can. Carrie?
Okay, well, that's a bad day for Salt Lake City, and certainly many of our members have experienced days like that. On scene was the media. Several homes were damaged. Water was shut down for a period of time. And so on scene, there are several priorities that you have. First of all, of course, is safety. We always look at that first for the public, for yourselves as you respond to these things. Mitigation, how do you shut this down the water flow or divert the sewer away from an area so that you can mitigate the damage. Restoration, and I'm not talking about repairing things in the long run, but restoring services as quick as possible. And then of course we'll add communication and documentation. These two things are pretty important. You don't want to get on scene without a communication plan and have the media show up and somebody unprepared, not knowing what to say, not knowing the full facts, speaking with the press and putting that out there for everybody to see. And then of course, documentation. And we suggest in these incidents, you have the mindset that you're documenting because there's going to be a lawsuit come of it. You never know which ones will result in a lawsuit, and you hope none of them do, but you can't tell at the scene which ones do. So always document as if you're going to court. Here's our big communications tip. Don't admit liability or state that you will pay for the damages. If a representative says that the city or the district will take care of that and that pay for all the damages, it relieves the pressure in the moment. But it certainly increases the pressure down the road if it's later determined that your entity could not have anticipated, could not have prevented the loss, whatever it was, sewer or water. What do you do at that point? If you've committed to it, saying we'll take care of these problems, but ultimately you're not responsible. Unfortunately, the trust, we're here to pay where you're liable. We have an added endorsement that we'll talk about in a little bit that helps when you're not liable, but generally that may not pay for 100% of the damages. But if you have committed to paying for it, where does that leave you? So it's better to just give information right up front about what you know. Don't commit to liability, but that this is a top priority, that you're investigating what's going on and resolving the problem as quickly as possible, and leave it at that if you can. So don't admit liability. And what about when the news is on the scene? Here's a tragic story. We're glad we don't have this in our state. 4,000 homes flooded with sewage in a year. Yikes. That's what do you think the news is going to take of that? Are they going to highlight the problems with the budget? Are they going to highlight how much work you're doing to fix this? Or are they going to highlight the problems and that the government is not taking care of them? So you want to be very careful. And when the news is on the scene, and I've taken this information from other presentations that I've attended with experts in public communication, have a plan and a spokesperson, somebody who knows the do's and don'ts when they're talking with the media. Never wing it, and avoid jargon. Jargon just confuses people, and they can take from that jargon whatever they want. And instead of being clear, you're being imprecise, which allows them to take it and make it their own. Speak to people, not to the camera, and don't speculate. Well, I think this happened because of this. Well, if you don't know, you've just created an expectation that was the problem. And if the expectation you created says that your entity is responsible, you didn't say you are responsible, but you've set up that expectation already. And then, again, don't admit fault. And we encourage any of you that have dealt with this before, that have tips and other advice, to put that in the chat or during the presentation so that we can all talk about it later. Love to hear your advice.
Hey, Jeff, as you're changing slides, that's about 7% of Syracuse, New York's homes get flooded with sewage every year. Wow.
7%. That is awful. Let's not get there. Thanks, Jason. So also at the scene, documentation, of course, you've got your forms that will need to be filled out, but take photos and videos. They are free. So take copious amounts of them, get up close to the problem, go far back, get different angles, consider, what's the cause, what are the damages, what are your response, scene safety, how you've set up your scene. It's not that uncommon when you have construction in the road for there to be an accident because of the construction in the road and the safety barriers that have been put up. So you want to be able to document not only what's going on with this situation, but that you appropriately protected the scene. And then if somebody comes and hits you because they're rubbernecking, you can show that you did everything appropriate and they're responsible for any damages from the secondary incident that happened. And when you're on scene, you don't think about that. You're focusing on your one thing. But take photos, take abundant photos and videos if you can, because all of that helps to determine the truth. And when we look at claims, that's what we're aiming for. We're aiming for finding the truth and getting to the bottom of that. And the sooner we can do that, the better, so that if we have to pay, we pay, and we do it quickly. If we're not responsible, then we've got the documentation and to hold up all the way through the long run, which is through the courts if it goes that far. Now, let me talk about a little issue that can be a real problem in these situations, and that's spoliation. We don't use that word spoliation very often. Sounds a lot like a spoilage, which is exactly what can happen if you don't do things correctly. You can spoil your case. Spoliation in civil litigation arises when one side suspects or uncovers that the other party has deliberately, negligently, or accidentally destroyed evidence relevant to a case. Where damages or injuries are serious, please, we recommend you keep the broken valves, the rock that blocked the sewer, the totaled vehicle, until it's appropriate to dispose of those items. There is a case that hit the news out of Park City from a water main break in 2021. The homeowner suing the city because the city has declined to accept responsibility, but their attorney is using spoliation against the city. Let me read this paragraph from a filing that they made, a motion for sanctions for spoliation. So they're trying to sanction Park City because they got rid of the parts that broke, causing the water main break. Here's the paragraph from this filing. Even after a torrent of water flooded the basement of Stemler's property for a number of hours, PCMC did not think it prudent to preserve the cause of the damages and crucial pieces of evidence in this case: the broken water main pipe, the valve bolts and bonnets, which are the broken valves. In order to remedy and redress the prejudice to which Stemler is now exposed due to PCMC's failure to preserve vital evidence, the court should enter default as to the issue of negligence against PCMC. Specifically, the court should deem that PCMC was negligent and that its negligence was the actual or proximate cause of the water break and the subsequent flooding of Stemler's home. So in other words, they're asking the court to say, bar the city from making any kind of defense for what happened. Don't let them bring up arguments that they were not negligent, because they made it so that we couldn't determine one way or the other if they were negligent. And so what they're trying to do is turn that case away from, is Park City responsible, to simply how much are the damages and what should Park City pay. You don't want to get into that situation. So certainly when you have a water main break, sewer backup, take photos. You don't need to keep the contents of the sewer, but take plenty of photos to show what it was like, where they came from, if you can. If you have broken pipes or valves, keep those for a while until you need to get rid of it. And if it's a situation where it's something that's just big and in the way and you really want to get rid of it, let us know. and either our claims adjuster or the attorney handling the case, we can let the other party know that we've got it and give them a period of time in which they can come and look at it and do what they want with it before we dispose of it. And that will save that problem. So avoid spoliation by saving evidence from the scene. Well, let's talk about after the response. What do we do after it's all done? Well, first of all, I'd just like to remind us that even though for you, water maintenance and backups, water main breaks, they've happened before, you know how to deal with them, but for a homeowner, it's probably never happened for them before. We really hope it's never happened for them before. And so they have immediate concerns about their property, health concerns when it comes to sewage, how do they clean it up and who will pay for it? And certainly what they want to know, what do I do now? And that creates a lot of anxiety and angst in them that we hope to help. And the best way to do that is through early communication. We want to avoid the situation where your city council or your board meetings are full of people, and certainly want to avoid a lot of angry people at your city council meetings demanding for answers. And again, the best way to do that is early communications and instructions to the people that are involved. So we have created a new process, and there will be a document attached to this presentation that you can download with instructions for you, and then instructions for our adjusters for that first 24 hours, how we communicate, how we get a claim started. And we're going to go through that real quickly here. Here's what the document looks like. And again, you can pull that off of this presentation. Well, first of all, what do our members do? What do you do? Number one, report the incident to the trust immediately. Just call us. That 801-363 number, that's my direct line. Call me, or you can call CSS. CSS, or Constitution State Services, is the trust's claim partner. They're a division of the Travelers Insurance Company, and they come to us with a wealth of resources and best-in-class services that we provide to our members. That all starts, we can put those into motion with a report. And if you let us know right away, there's no need to know who's damaged, how many people are damaged, how much the damage was, or even if you're at fault. Just let us know that it happened. Give us what you know at that point in time. We've damaged one home, 3 homes. It happened at this time at this location. That gives us enough to start a claim and to get the resources engaged. Also, investigate and determine the cause of loss. And that's an ongoing thing, and that often takes more than 24 hours. But the sooner you start, the better. And it allows us to say, when we call these affected homeowners or businesses, that the investigation is ongoing, that it's a top priority for you as our member, and we'll be able to answer that question as quick as possible. So start on that investigation and determine the cause of loss as soon as you can. Gather contact information from those affected. You know, I wouldn't leave this to the guys that are actually repairing the pipes, moving the water away. Maybe have somebody else come out and identify those with damages so that you can get that information while they're responding to the loss. And then inform the homeowner that they need to mitigate their own damages. Under the law, everybody has a responsibility to do what they can to make it so that they have as little damage as possible. If they can start cleaning the water out of their basement, remove carpets, call for damage restoration company, that is their responsibility. The courts will hold them responsible for that. So just inform them of that, and that gives them something to do as well, so they don't feel hopeless and like there's nothing that they can do. Let them know that. We will also be attaching to this presentation just a general list of vendors, disaster restoration vendors, who we have vetted. These are not contractors that we have on contract. These are vendors that we worked with a lot, that we know will charge an appropriate amount. They will keep their scope of services with appropriate, and they will communicate well with you and with others. They're not the fly-by-night kind of companies that come and go because they have problems. So you can share with them that list and let them pick a vendor, but don't tell them that it's somebody that we will pay for. It's just a vendor, an option for them to use, but that they need to get started on the work themselves. Number 5, inform the homeowner that they should report the situation to their homeowner's insurance as required under their policy. Their insurance policy may or may not provide coverage, but they have a duty to report losses to them. And where they do have coverage, it may be faster going through their homeowner's insurance to find a company that their insurer actually has a contract with that will provide discounted rates, whatever that is. Also, their insurance policy will often provide replacement cost coverage. That's not something that we provide. We provide actual cash value replacement. So sheetrock, paint, concrete, those kinds of things, they don't depreciate. So we pay the full value putting those things up there. But your couch, your carpet that's 5 years old, we pay what the value of that is at the time of the loss. That's what's appropriate. That's what makes them whole. But their insurance company will go beyond that. And that's because they have a contractual obligation to do that. And so they may choose to go through their insurance carrier for speed, as well as to get replacement of everything. And then their insurance company can come back and make a claim with us. But encourage them to inform their insurance carrier. And then provide the homeowner with a notice of claim form and instructions. If you don't have a notice of claim form, I did a presentation on this topic back in 2021, which describes what a notice of claim form is, why it's required under state law, and how it provides you as an organization protection. So you can reach back and watch that presentation. And I actually wore the same shirt and tie today just to match up with that presentation for you. So remember the HROC claim that I talked about right at the beginning, where the pipe broke and sent the wall of water and mud and rocks down into this home. Well, the city did what they could. They helped clean up a little bit, helped drain the pool down, get the mud out, but there was damage. There was upwards of $400,000 damage to this home on the hillside in Salt Lake City. The homeowner chose to go through his own homeowner's insurance, and they paid for his loss. Then about 2 years later, that insurance carrier came back to the city and said, you caused this damage. It was clearly your pipe that was the problem. We're suing you for these hundreds of thousands of dollars that we paid. Unfortunately for them, their insurance company nor the homeowner had filed a notice of claim against the city. And at that point in time, they were barred by law. So the homeowner was made whole by his insurance carrier, but the insurance carrier literally could not and had no legal standing to make a claim against the city. We offered them $5,000. They accepted it and went away. So the notice of claim process is protective of you as a public entity. If you don't have a form, just reach out to me at the number on the previous slide, 801-363-2468, or send me an email. And I'd be happy to send you a draft form so you can put one together for your organization, and I'll provide some guidance on that. Okay, now what will the adjusters do? Once we've gotten notice of the loss, hopefully within that first 24 hours, we will contact back you as the member, the adjuster that's assigned. And they'll get updated information from the time you reported it to when they can call you back, which should be same day or next if it's later in the day. So they'll get that information, they'll gather the contact information, and then they will establish primary contact, meaning they will call the people that have been affected, let them know that they are the ones to call about the claim, that they will have the answers for them, taking that monkey off of your back and putting it on us, which is where it should be. We will have the most up-to-date information. We'll be doing the investigation and determination of liability and working towards settlement. So we'll refer those people to us and not back to the city or to your special service district. We will also explain the process and we'll set expectations. We will reiterate that they have a duty to mitigate their own damages, suggest they file a claim with their insurance company, and tell them that the investigation is ongoing if that's the case, or if it's not, and we found that your entity is responsible, that you were negligent in some way in causing this to happen, then coverage applies. We'll pay up to our policy limit if it happens. As far as I know, we've never had a loss that was that much, not near what your policy limits are with the trust, but we certainly have had claims that were hundreds of thousands of dollars. And if you're responsible, we'll pay for that. Up to whatever it takes to make them whole, or actual cash value and replacement cost for those things that don't depreciate. But what if you're not negligent, which is by and large the case, that there's nothing you could have done to prevent it. And that's what we find more cases. That is how it turns out. And if you're not at fault, then the chief executive of your organization has the opportunity to use an endorsement, the no fault and potable water endorsement, which allows us to pay on a no fault basis up to $5,000 per household and up to $100,000 per year for damages caused at no fault of your own to these third parties. Well, under that endorsement, what's covered? We cover claims that arise out of the release of sewage by passing back through toilets and or drains in the premises owned by a third party, or for the sudden or accidental or unintended release of potable water. I've got portable there, I'll have to fix that. Potable water from pipes or utilities owned by your insured. So there are some circumstances that aren't covered here. For instance, we have seen on occasion cases where for some reason the pressure goes up and pipes burst inside of somebody's home. That isn't covered by this ordinance, but by and large, the incidents that we find are from broken pipes on our side or the release of sewage, and we pay for that. Again, we pay up to $5,000 per household and up to $100,000 per member, and that is at your discretion. You can choose to use that or not. If you don't want us to pay that, we'll simply deny the claim because you're not negligent in that circumstance, and we'll move on. But if you choose that, then we will apply it. And we also let people know that you have chosen that even though you're not responsible, that you would like to do something, and so that you have given us authority to use that $5,000. It provides a little bit of PR for you and allows us to do what we can. Oftentimes, if people have insurance, they still have a deductible, or the loss may be more than what their insurance will pay. So we pay that deductible and whatever is not paid by their insurance company up to that $5,000 per household. Let me know if you have any questions about that. Well, you might ask, when would there be a time where we would spend $100,000 per year at $5,000 per household? Well, we haven't seen it except in circumstances where there's been massive flooding, and that flooding inundated the sewer systems and then sent water back up the sewer pipes. That's where the picture from the toilet came from, an incident in 2021. The community that was involved here is probably on this call, and if you are, I apologize for reigniting your post-traumatic stress syndrome from this circumstance. We hope that this doesn't happen again this year, but if it does, we do want you to know that that endorsement would apply, and we can pay up to $100,000 for damages to people's homes where you're not at fault, but where flooding caused this sort of thing to happen. So that's what happens within the first 24 hours. We encourage you to build your programs of communication around what we ask you to do within that time to facilitate our early response and our quick action on your behalf in these situations. What happens after the first 24 hours? We, of course, our adjusters will communicate with your claimants. They will help them gather information on what their losses are, perhaps guide them towards getting resources to doing the repairs. They will also assess the liability and damages and offer an appropriate settlement where that is appropriate. They'll provide the member with periodic status reports. So however often you want it, we've seen it most often every 2 weeks. We'll send an email out to whoever in your organization should get it with all of the claimants and what the status of their claims are, whether they're unresolved, whether the people aren't responding, whether they plan to not accept the no-fault settlement because they're wanting to sue. Whatever the case is, we'll give you an update. And again, if you get calls from these people, we recommend that you refer them back to us. You're not involved in the claim process, don't know exactly where it is, and so you wouldn't necessarily have the most up-to-date information. But if you're getting a lot of calls where people are saying, I'm not hearing from them, certainly let me know, and we'll get to the bottom of it. But that doesn't generally happen. Well, just to wrap up here, yours is an industry where, where claims happen. And so it's best to be prepared. Take these steps to do the best you can with your system. Prepare yourselves by doing some good background information, giving that to your elected officials or your board so that they can appropriately provide a budget for you. Have a response plan and act upon that, and then communicate with us as soon as possible. With that, we can make these terrible situations as best as possible and hopefully minimize the complaints, the press, all of that with your organization, get things resolved and life back to normal as quick as possible. With that, I'm happy to take your recommendations if you have anything to add from your experience or any questions.
Folks, just go ahead and type those questions or comments, recommendations into the chat box, and we'll get to those. We'll get to those right now. Wow, those are some pretty challenging situations, Jeff, that we deal with, and ones that I think this is a great guide for us to help us be a little better prepared for what those challenges might bring to us. What would you? I thought we'd have a few more questions about a few of those other things that you were talking about in there about code, ensuring code is adequately written to protect the organization there. Let's see. Not seeing questions. I know we've got a lot of people on here today.
A lot of people on, not a quiet people this morning.
And I'm certain that people's minds are on that white stuff up in the mountain that we just kept getting and is getting ready to come down for us. And we will respond in those situations as well as best as possible. But these sewer backups and water main breaks, they're with us all the time.
Yeah.
We hope for the best when they do happen, and we believe we've got a good plan to help you communicate with your residents and get to as swift a resolution as possible.
All right, Jeff, looks like we haven't got a question there, so we'll let that be the final word of the day. Thank you so much for your information there. And just as Jeff said, he has those documents that he'll be providing. I will send those out to everybody that signed up for the presentation as we send out a follow-up email that says that this recording has been placed up on the YouTube channel. So anything else, Jeff?
Nope. Thanks, everybody, and good luck this spring.
All right. Thanks, folks. Appreciate it. Go out and have a safe day.
Thank you.